This is the Firring family story, which I would say is a series of miracles and a couple of good decisions. Um, how miraculous, you say? Well, let's start at the beginning. What you're looking at is the picture of my mom and dad on their wedding day. It was June 20th, 1936. And that was the depths of the Depression. But they were doing good. My father had graduated from the University of Michigan with an aeronautical engineering degree, and they were making their way in life. They tried to have children, but were unable to. And about 6 years into their marriage, my mother had an incident where she had an ovary removed. And so, she talked to the doctor about the chances of her getting pregnant, and he said, well, they're half as good as they were before. So after that, she had a miscarriage and then got pregnant with me. She stayed in bed for virtually 9 months, and that brought me into the world. And so I was born with some major privileges, which I've only realized 60 years later. Number one, I was white. Number two, I was straight. And number three, I was born into a two-parent family who loved me. So that was the beginning. What you're looking at now is that this young man was my grandfather about 120 years ago. He came to the United States from Denmark and wound up settling in Chicago. He was a good salesman, and he began working as a milkman for the Borden Milk Company. And he was, in those days, they didn't have grocery stores. And so the milkman became the delivery guy for all kinds of products. Milk, all dairy products. He expanded into housewares, into certain food items, and he was such a good salesman. The Borden kept giving him more routes. But he was an ambitious guy and found a backer and started the Firring Tea Company. And that got changed to the coffee company. And so he dealt in coffee, tea, spices, all those kinds of things. And he built up the business so that in the late 20s, he had 5 or 6 of these guys working for him. Unfortunately, he had all of his money in a bank that closed during the Depression. And so he was not only broke, but owed a lot of money to suppliers. And unlike today, where bankruptcy is considered a strategic option by businesses, and people are not given a black eye for having gone bankrupt. In those days, it was much different. And he spent the rest of his career paying off his creditors. So that brings me to my father. My father grew up in Chicago and was always interested in aviation. He wound up going to as I said, to the University of Michigan and graduating in aeronautical engineering. He started working in aviation, and ultimately, although the sales seems to be the family gift, he got diverted and became the president of a small aviation company in Chicago. And so they were doing, fine. I was growing up, and then in the late 50s, Sputnik happened. And that caused the race to the moon, you may recall. And all of a sudden, that became a national priority. There was a lot of money that was diverted into this. And so the company, that's what they started doing. They had a lot of parts on the early space or the early rocket ships, and that was culminated when John Glenn was the first man to circle the Earth. Unfortunately for him, the company had acquired another company, and that company was a union shop. And so there became a battle as to whether, the company that he was with was going to unionize or not. And the requirements for space travel were very exacting. Among them was that all of the welds on all the equipment had to be X-rayed. And one of the union reps called the FBI and said that the company was cheating on that. And so the FBI came in and basically shut the company down for a year. Turned out they were not cheating on their X-rays, but that caused my father to have a heart attack, which he never really recovered from. Ultimately, the company was sold, but he was never part of it again. So that's my background. And I grew up and went to high school at an all-boys boarding school in Lake Forest, Illinois. I was young for being an incoming freshman and immature. And there were some really smart guys in that class. And so I have always been humble about my academic prowess after going to that school. Although it was painful at the time, I was really homesick and all, but it turned out to be a good thing. It toughened me up, and that turned out to be good in the long run. I went to college at the University of Denver. My original idea was to be in hotel and restaurant management. I had a chance to go to Cornell, but after growing up in the Midwest, I didn't want to spend another 4 years of my life in upstate New York. Denver was a very exciting city. And so I wound up graduating from there in 1968. 1968, you'll recall, was a turbulent time. We had Vietnam going on. Lyndon Johnson did not run for president again. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated. The drug culture was rampant, and a lot of my friends went off the deep end. Fortunately for me, I fell in love with a woman who was really a straight arrow. And so while my friends were fleeing to Canada, flunking out and getting drafted, moving to the backside of Aston Mountain and living in a yurt, I wound up going to graduate school, and I graduated with an MBA in 1969. So I had a fraternity brother who was a couple of years older, who had gone to work for a Wall Street firm in Denver. And he made $10,000 in 1968. And let me tell you, $10,000, that was more than double what I was making. And it just seemed like all the money in the world. And I wanted to do that. And so I tried interviewing and couldn't get a job, but a man gave me some good advice. I was 21 at the time. And he said, what you should do is go to work for a bank or a CPA firm for 5 years, learn about business, meet some people, and then if you're still interested, go back. And so that's what I decided to do. My wife and I came out to Los Angeles with all of our stuff in our car. It was probably common in those days. And I went to work for Security Pacific Bank. which at the time was a large bank in Southern California, the largest bank in Southern California. I started on the branch management training program, and there was someone in charge of me who wanted to know what my aspirations were for my career. And after I told him, he sent me into I got me an interview in the investment department. And so banks in those days were, because of the depression, they were limited to selling only government and municipal bonds. And a municipal bond is issued by the state and their political subdivisions, cities, school districts, things like that. And the interest that they pay is tax-free. And so I became the first salesman of Security Pacific Bank. And that was 1972. And it looked, in those days, there were still guys around who had been working during the Depression. And they said, that the stockbrokers were jumping out of windows, but the bond guys always did well. And so I thought, I think this is going to be a good thing for me. And besides, this is bonds. It's a stable backwater that nobody paid much attention to. And then, so I did. I joined in the summer of '72, and then in 1973, this happened. You may recall price of gasoline doubling. Well, they couldn't get gas. There were gas lines. And that was a crisis that wound up, there were things called stagflation. You see what happened to the price of oil. And we had three presidents of Nixon, Ford, and Carter. And the economic times then were just not good. Inflation was going up, and the economy was not good. So New York City is a municipality, and they had issued vast amounts of municipal debt, amounts they couldn't pay. And they appealed to the White House, and famously, President Ford vetoed the bailout. So that put things further into disarray. And then in 1978, the voters of California passed Proposition 13, which most of the financing in those days were paid back by property taxes. Well, Proposition 13 said that the tax base was frozen and could only go up by 2% a year. So people wanted the services, of course, they just didn't want to pay for them. And so that put the state of California certainly, and really the entire municipal or national economy in turmoil. So we've got inflation happening, interest rates soaring. Nobody knows what's going on, but this was a good time. Chaos actually is a good time to be in the investment business. We had Business Week in 1979, and probably the worst prediction of all time, predicted that stocks were going nowhere. And so the effect of this was to drive more and more people into bonds. And bonds in those days were quite attractive. A further limiting factor was that the rating services could never figure out what the California general obligations are considered the prime security of the state. And every other municipality kind of is looked at based on the ratings of the California general obligations. So as you can see, they have gone from being BBB to AAA. And so that has kept investors off balance the entire time. But as I said, this was a good time to be selling bonds. Interest rates were high, and there was a lot of demand. And so I left the bank and joined a company called Stone and Youngberg. Stone and Youngberg was founded in 1931 and was a regional, they're based in San Francisco, and they're a municipal bond specialist firm. And so all we did was sell municipal bonds. And so, you know, life was really good. You know, we went through the American dream. You know, we had bought houses and had dogs and had kids, and, you know, life was good. And then in 1998, I meant, this isn't advancing very well. Then this happened. So I was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma. An acoustic neuroma is a benign brain tumor, which is deep in the skull. And as you can see, is wrapped around the facial nerve and the balance nerve. And so acoustic neuromas in and of themselves won't kill you, but they have to come out because otherwise they keep growing. And sooner or later will interrupt brain function, and then you die. While they could come out, it was pretty brutal. People typically lost all feeling on one side of their face because the facial nerve was damaged so much. And they lost their balance. Typically, you know, they walked with a stagger for the rest of their life. It was so bad that doctors often said to young people, let's just put this surgery off for a couple of years. And so you can have a normal life until we have to do this to you. Fortunately for me, and this is another miracle, they had just developed a technique where they could go in through the ear canal. And so the tumor was removed. That's why I am deaf in one ear. And as you can see, this photo was taken a couple of weeks after the operation when I was taking my daughter to college. But you can see I had complete facial paralysis. Oh, by the way, you couldn't blink your eye either. And so people, you know, eventually the eye dried out and people lost the use of that eye. But fortunately for me, they were able to get the tumor out, and you know, and I you just keep getting better. I couldn't do anything for about 5 years. I used to play golf, tennis, racquetball, all kinds of sports, but I couldn't do that for about 5 years while I was getting my faculties back. And so that's when I took up painting. I painted, here's a couple of examples. I did that for about 5 years. And the biggest thing I got out of it was, excuse me a second, was an appreciation for real artists. Fortunately, the tumor, you know, fortunately I healed back up and was able to resume the activities I'd done before. So about this time, my son joined me, and he joined. We were still at Stone and Youngberg, and I eventually resigned as a partner of the firm to become partners with him. And things were good. The time frame here is the early 2000s, but we were in the transaction business, meaning nothing happened unless we made a phone call. Had to be at our desk all the time, and there was just all kinds of turmoil. What we wanted to do was get on the other side of the table, work with clients for a fee, and basically handle all of their financial needs. Stone Youngberg was unable to do that. So in 2005, we went to work for Wells Fargo, first in Brentwood, but pretty soon thereafter, moved over to Beverly Hills, where my son still is. It was quite a transition for me because all of my clients were bond buyers, and Wells Fargo did not offer the kind of bonds that they wanted. So while my son was doing great, so at this point I'm around 60, he's like 35, and all of the other employees are about his age. And so it seems that I find all of the people wanted to partner with him. There were very few people who wanted to partner with me, which I struggled with for a long time. But so I had plenty of time, and I got to go to the University of Wells Fargo for a few years and learn about investing. And one of the things that they always talked about when they made new presentations to clients was that this was called the Brinson Report, and it was amazing. But it turns out more than 90% of the long-term performance of a portfolio is dictated by your asset allocation, specifically the amount of money that you allocate toward equities versus bonds. And I thought, wow, that is really interesting. And then I observed there were, just many technological advances were going on. The computer age was upon us. You could recall what a cell phone used to look like in the late 80s. And the most dramatic thing I can think of is the change in television sets. So I could see, I became convinced of the value of equities. This was after having all my money in bonds all the time, and was waiting for the right time to, when do you start? So then this happened. This was 2008, and there was a banking and real estate crisis that I'm sure you remember well. And the stock market was plunging. So Warren Buffett, who I'm sure you all know, took out an op-ed piece in the New York Times saying that he was putting all of his personal money into equities. Before that, he had been in government bonds. And I thought, you hear about hot tips in the stock market. Here's the legendary investor putting an ad in the New York Times telling people what to do. And although most people didn't, I thought, if it's good enough for Warren, it's good enough for me. So as they say in poker, I went all in, and I'm still all in on the risk side. So you can see that despite Warren Buffett having said people should put their money into stocks, only 6% of the money since then has actually done that. Very high percentage has gone into bonds. So what happened? Well, this was about 2009, where, if you can see my pointer, where things started. And so in short, the market has tripled in the intermediate period. And more importantly, for us retired people, the dividend on the S&P has doubled. So as I said, I was sitting around and done all this stuff, and really not feeling good about myself because I didn't get these young guys to partner with me. And finally, someone said, it doesn't matter what you say or who you are. Everyone knows that 10 years from now, you're not going to be here. So why should we even bother? And so I got thinking about that, and I said, I can't fight that. So it's time to change. And that's when I found Sun City Shadow Hills. So all of my clients through the years were old retired people, and virtually all of them missed working. And that all changed when I met some people over at Sun City Palm Desert in the late 90s. They were the happiest people in retirement I ever met. And I thought, you know, when my time comes, this is something that I should look into. So I bought a house here in 2011 and loved it. Was spending about half the time here. I was playing golf, tennis, pickleball, doing all kinds of things. However, things, you can't fight Father Time. And in 2014, I suffered a detached retina. And so this was the same thing that Bruce Latta had, but only mine was much worse. I wound up having 5 surgeries in that eye. And although, you know, it's recovered, I couldn't follow a moving ball anymore. And so I had to find some other things to do. So one of the things I did was start a podcast here. The podcast is about 5 years old. We've done about 250 episodes, we're approaching 110,000 downloads. And it's been particularly during this COVID experience where people can't get out, it proved to be a really useful thing in the community. Meanwhile, my son has done fine without me. In fact, his career has blossomed into areas that I never dreamed possible. And so he continues to work in Beverly Hills, lives in Manhattan Beach, and has 2 kids. My daughter became still is a kindergarten teacher. And as you can see, married a guy who grew up in Haiti. And so knowing him for the last 15 years has sensitized me to the Black experience in the United States of America is much different than the white experience. And he's really helped me grow. I've got 5 grandchildren. This was taken in Christmas of 2019. So this was actually the last time we were able to get together. And so they've grown considerably since then. So I have one more miracle to share. 2 years ago, my daughter this is a brain aneurysm in her skull. Now that is what's happening here is the blood was clotted in this vein is being stretched that much. And so, you know, if the vein bursts, it's all over. And so she went through, you know, talking to various doctors saying, you know, we can get this out, but we got to go through your skull. And the collateral damage was, you know, really, really bad. However, about a year before, someone had come up with a procedure, this was done at Stanford, where they could, you know, take a tiny fiber and feed it up through her groin through mapping and take it all the way up into her brain and clip it so that no more blood went in, and the vein, you know, over time will go back to its original size. So fortunately, she's had no problem since then. And so, as Bugs Bunny would say, that's all, folks. That's the story of my life. Thank you.